And while you're looking for that, I think the other thing I would tell the viewers is that in your research, when you talk to the franchisor, very important. But the second piece of that is, or the second stage of your due diligence research is called validation, when you're speaking to other owners. Mm-hmm. Because franchising is regulated, in the disclosure document, if a franchise does not make an earnings representation in the item 19, mm-hmm. which is always the earnings claim, it is illegal for them to share anything with you. So if you're like, well, wait a minute, why would I look at this if I don't know how much money I'm going to make? What they should say is, hey, we're a young franchise. We don't have enough audited data yet, but you're going to get all that information when you speak to our owners. Great.
Yes.
And then the next phase is that you speak to owners. They are under no restriction, and they can and usually will tell you everything. And I often tell my clients, if you're only hearing rainbows and puppies, that's not realistic. You're going to want to speak to top performers, kind of middle of the road, and underperformers. And often, I may have a client that goes, you know what, I relate more to the low performers. And I say, hey, that does not mean that you cannot, that's a litmus test that you will not be successful as a small business owner. That franchise may not be a fit for you. Right. Maybe it's one that's a heavy sales, and you've determined, I thought I'd be okay with that. The more I hear from those owners, that does not sound like something I would enjoy doing, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. But in franchising, there are 2 fees that you pay for, and I feel like I owe the listeners to share this.
Sure.
There are 2 main fees. One is the non-refundable initial franchise fee. Right. So that covers, like your training, the support team that they have, basically helps pay for the ongoing support system training, basically the entire system that they've built. The range is anywhere in the 150 that I represent, from 20,000 to 75,000.
Okay.
With the average being somewhere in that $40,000 range. Mm-hmm. When you sign an agreement, that's the only thing you owe right when you sign the check. Like I mentioned, my $246,002.43. Now, once I get up and going, now I'm going to pay royalties as a % of my gross revenue. I often tell my clients that's the gift you will never stop giving back to the franchisor. So when I work with people that really have a hard time with that concept, that go, wait a minute, why should I pay them over time? And I'm like, either it makes sense to you or it doesn't.
Right.
Because in the beginning, the franchisors are making a lot of money. When I'm ramping up and I'm doing that, all they're doing is supporting me. It's in outer years, year 3 plus, where they're really making a lot of money as I'm hitting it out of the park, and I don't need quite as much support.
Right.
And that's when people get some angst and go, well, why do I still have to pay? Well, do you not remember those first couple years, when they were supporting you as you ramped up?
Yes.
Now, I think when most people kind of sit down and do the math and go, wait a minute, I'm going to pay somewhere in the range of 5 to 10% of my gross revenue. And often there's an additional marketing fee, like an NAF, a National Ad Fund. Now, often I'll help people sit down and do the math. Like, what would you pay if you had to hire staff and people to do all those activities? And most of the time is you would have to pay a heck of a lot more than the franchisor, who, let's be honest, hopefully has subject matter expertise on those matters. There's one franchise I represent that has a 10%, which is the high end of the range, but they have an inbound call center. So they're taking inbound calls and making appointments on behalf of the franchisees.
Yes.
They're doing a lot of the back office and invoicing and that kind of thing. So you really have to sit down and go, what am I getting for this? And if you feel it makes sense, fantastic. And if you don't, and you feel like you could do it better, well, then you should take a pass.
Yeah.
And look at something else. It's as simple as that.
It really is. I agree.
Yes. But when people, often I will get a referral from, someone from the SBA looking at a franchise that I don't represent, and they have a certain amount of frustration because they know the gross revenue, but they don't know what that means for them. How much money am I going to make?
Right.
So I'm here to tell all of you, you're not going to get that number more than likely until you do validation. So
Good
when you're
point.
reading the
Good
disclosure
point.
document, you're going to get probably a gross revenue.
Yes.
So if I see, and the reason for that is that's how the franchisor is paid, you know, is right off the gross revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So if I look at a franchise and I go, oh, I'm going to invest a total of $150,000 and I have an average gross revenue of $700,000 plus in outer, you know, years, year 3 plus, I'm kind of excited about that.
Yes.
But until I know what my EBITDA or net profit percentage is,
Exactly.
I'm kind of wait and see.
Yes.
And most of the time, you're not going to have that in the disclosure document
Mm-hmm.
because let's say you had a C corporation. You know, you're
Right.
gonna have a very different tax strategy than if I have an LLC.
Absolutely.
It is illegal in franchising for the franchisor to tell you what to pay people because it's your business.
Ah.
You know, one of the
That's good to
big
know.
legal issues in franchising is co-employment. So there needs to be some separation.
Okay.
So they may provide you in training with, hey, here's an example of a job description for this person, but they're your employee and you hire them.
Yes.
So in my home care example, you know, there was 2 agencies that were wildly successful. One, the guy ran it within the bumper rails of the franchise,
Right.
you know,
Yes.
and he did very well and off he went. The other lady paid her son about $120,000 for a role that paid about $40,000.
Oh my goodness.
Hey, it's her business and she can do what she wants. It was her
Yes.
own little estate planning.
Right.
But the point is, there's a lot of noise in that net profit. And the other thing that I often tell people to think about is that the more specificity a franchise has in their financial, the more auditing they're going to do of you as an owner.
Oh.
So
That's
think
good to
about,
know.
like, hey, what is the trade-off?
Absolutely.
And as an owner, I would rather have less onus on me to do reporting back to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I'm still going to do my due diligence and figure it out. I'm just going to figure it out when I talk to owners. I'm just not going to get that. And I'd almost rather hear that number from the horse's mouth, from the
too.
business owner.
Definitely.
Right.
So that would be part of a person's due diligence too.
Absolutely.
And talking to owners of a particular franchise that you're interested in, and hopefully the franchisor would facilitate that connection, or maybe you can just waltz into, you know, a Subway and, you know, build that rapport and, you know,
Right.
perhaps just, you know, ask on site if you could have a conversation with the owner and you're thinking about opening up a Subway.
And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how open most owners are, especially if you're going to be a neighbor, because they know how important it is to
Yes.
have. If you buy a franchise, you are agreeing to be listed in the disclosure document.
Oh.
So if you did do research, you would be listed in this list.
Oh, very
Now,
good.
most of the time, a franchisor will give you a little list, you know, and do they
Yes.
cherry pick some of the,
Mhm.
you know, enthusiastic
Yeah.
pom-pom having
Uh-huh.
owners? Probably.
Probably.
But may you call whomever you like? You absolutely may.
Sure.
Now, some industries are heavily competitively shopped. And so in my home care days, there was 34 home care franchises.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
So for my clients that don't want a lot of organized competition, I'm like, well, then I'm not going to show you home care because that is not for the faint of heart, you know, if you're not
Yes.
open to heavy competition.
Mhm.
Now, in that particular example, I would argue it's heavy competition because there's a lot of need, you
Right,
know.
there is.
And, you know,
Absolutely.
and I think most of people watching this know if you have an aging loved one, we're not even to the nadir of where that's going to, you know, come to a
Right.
head, so to speak.
Right.
But because it was so competitively shopped, when people would call me for validation, we had a code word.
Ah.
So most industries are not nearly as cloak and dagger, but I do remember, and I kind of chuckle, that the code word was panda. For the last, I'm like, so what's the code word, Kathleen? And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I'd be like, you know what, let me go back and talk to the franchisor and I'll get back to you.
Mhm.
And then typically I would find out, yeah, they weren't either serious or they, you know, weren't in our
Uh-huh.
process.
Sure.
So I would say, yes, go around and shop. You know, when I looked at my first franchise, I was looking at a gym pretty seriously.
Oh, really?
Absolutely. Because I like to do that as an activity.
Sure.
And then what I realized, and I think some people have had this experience, I finally came to the conclusion. I went to LA Boxing, which is now UFC gyms.
Yes. Oh,
And I said,
wow.
wow, I want to join. I don't want to own one. Although in hindsight, it does have recurring revenue. You know, it's a recession-resistant category. There's a lot of great things about that industry. But the point is, I did a lot of competitive analysis. You know, and I went to other franchises and just said, oh, how do they do that differently? You know, how is the business model of what I was looking at a little bit tweaked? You know, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But for those of you out there thinking, well, I love yoga, maybe I'm going to open a yoga studio, I would highly encourage you to think about, are you going to take your hobby and ruin it? Yeah.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Excellent point. Yes.
Yeah. If you don't like managing employees and this retail experience and,
Exactly.
you know, doing one of the single biggest things you will do owning a franchise is local marketing.
Definitely.
And so
that's key.
If I'm going to own a yoga studio, one of my top skills should be having an orientation around, you know, doing local marketing and advertising.
Right.
You know, how do I get people to come in and incent trial and do that kind of thing? Now, often when I work with people, they're like, well, I like doing that. I like the idea of it, but I've never done that before. And I say, well, you're not in it completely by yourself. You know, if you have an orientation towards sales, operations, marketing, and advertising, the franchisor is going to provide enough of a framework where, in theory, you can figure it out.
Right.
Like, I know and I love what you've done here, Kathleen, with all your live streaming and all the social media. I know I need to do that, but I don't like to.
I understand.
So I have a franchise that supports me strongly in those deficits that I have.
Excellent.
And so I think in franchising, people that are successful, they leverage the heck out of what they're good at, and then the franchisor kind of shores in the things that maybe they're not so good at.
Well, that's good to have that type of supportive environment.
Right.
To help enhance the chances of being a successful franchisee. And with that, I'd like to ask or get your advice on this. How would you caution a person from not getting so caught up with the hot trends? Like, I remember a few years ago, curves was a very hot trend.
Yes.
A couple other, child-oriented franchises were a hot trend. What would be some advice that you would advise with that?
That's a great question. And I think that is the $64,000 question. Is how do I, as a consumer, mitigate or lower my risk?
Right.
And so I would say a couple things. One, does the franchise have a good track record?
Yes.
You know, even if they're new to franchising, often, like I have a franchise I represent that's in hair care. They've had company locations for 15 years.
Wow.
You know, and like 10 or 12 in different states.
Oh my.
So that's not like a huge national, franchise, but enough to go, okay, this is not a fly-by-night kind of situation. But they're new to franchising.
Yeah.
So maybe they're going to have some bumps in the road as they do that. But I would say the single biggest thing is, what is your risk profile? And when I do this assessment, I often will sit with someone. If their risk is closer to true entrepreneur, then I'm like, you know what? Maybe you're comfortable being the first unit in the valley.
Yes.
Maybe, taking on that hot new trend. Now, most of the time I will tell them I may not have anything to show them since I have a lot of the hot new trends. But, a perfect example of that I would say is like in food franchising. Pizza and wings or chicken are far outpacing burgers and fries.
Oh, yes.
Like as a category. So I would say even if you were with a younger franchise in this customizable pizza space, I would consider that probably less of a risk than maybe doing, a high capital standalone restaurant franchise.
I agree.
So I'd say, look at those kind of things. But I think the most important thing is, what is your risk profile?
Absolutely.
And I think you need to look at the franchise and what is their track record, and then what is the industry track record.
Yes, and also with the one of the advantages of working with FranNet and Sarah is that they look at it not in addition to steering you clear or helping you make an informed decision about these hot trends. They may not necessarily be the go-to fit for you, but also they work specifically with recession-resistant models as well for franchise options.
Absolutely.
Which is fantastic.
And I often have clients that look at something on their own and then maybe look at one or two things with me. And hopefully with the tools that the SBA, the Women's Business Center, that FranNet have, they can make a good apples to apples, and be a good educated consumer. It sounds Pollyanna-ish, but I truly want people to make an educated decision.
Yes, absolutely.
And often the best advice I can give someone is, don't do this.
Very good.
Yeah.
Now that's comforting.
Yeah.
That's comforting. Absolutely.
And especially if they're going to do such a financial stretch, I say there's no reason to do that.
Right.
There are franchises at almost every price point.
Yes.
Now, I will say that the lowest one that I represent has a net worth requirement of $100,000 total. So that's liquid. It's about a $45,000 total investment. But the point is, in franchising, that's considered low cost.
Yes.
And in retail, to give you a sense, hair care somewhere in that $150 to $250 range.
Yes.
Probably right around $200,000. I thought that was much lower than I thought. Mako is going to be somewhere in that $250,000 to $300,000.
Right.
Just because they have more space than a typical auto body. Food is going to be anywhere from low cost of $150,000 for a small, upwards of $500,000 plus.
Yes.
And then service franchises, the ServPro of the world, somewhere in that $75,000 to $150,000 range. Home care, if you're doing your own agency, kind of a similar range, $75,000 to $150,000. I think one of the last things I would just share some of the trends in recession-resistant franchising. If you have a franchise, for example, like Right at Home or Budget Blinds. Budget Blinds sold out in the Valley. Love Budget Blinds. Yes. Incredibly veteran-friendly. They've had moments where they have either waived or cut the franchise fee in half for veterans. So,
wow,
incredibly veteran. Absolutely. But how do they grow if they're sold out in most of the country? Well, they can't take territory from you to give it to me because that would not be cool. So they grow by taking sort of synergistic franchises in a similar industry, home services. And they'll take these young businesses that are great businesses, but they're not franchises. They'll bring them in and take the same great training and support that they've had for over a decade for Budget Blinds and bring it to this new franchise. So, yeah. So I think that's kind of an exciting way that if one of my clients has more of a risk tolerance, I'll say, hey, this is a great recession-resistant industry. This is a great franchise or home franchise concepts, Budget Blinds, Tailored Living, both sold out here. But Concrete Craft, great franchise, recession-resistant, phenomenal training. That might be a way to get to the higher risk person. Where if I have someone that is very low risk, I might be like, let's look at a Mako, or let's look at something where they have a very low failure rate.
Right.
One of the franchises I love as a consumer and a business is I Love Kickboxing. Sold out in the Valley, people. So if you want that, as much as it pains me. But they have 200 units nationwide. I've never had a closure.
That's impressive.
Yes.
Wow.
It's a very strong semi-absentee franchise.
Sure.
But if I had someone that was interested in something like that, I may go, you know what? Boutique fitness is a good fit for you. Recurring revenue, semi-absentee, recession-resistant, that membership model. And maybe look at something like Pilates, which is, people are like, Pilates, is that a fad? I'm like, hey, 25 years.
Oh, it's fantastic.
LeBron James does Pilates. It's becoming much more mainstream. So that, hopefully that answers your question. because I know we're probably almost out of time.
Yeah, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I hope that this webinar was really educational for you. And if you'd like more information, again, please contact Sarah. And Sarah, could you please share
Absolutely.
your contact information and along with the assessment as well?
That'd be great. So Sarah Brown, easy to spell, easy to remember, Sarah with an H. But you can reach me at sbrown@frannet.com. So F as in Frank, RANNET.com. Or please call or text me at 702-378-7921. So once again, 702-378-7921. I'm a firm Gen Xer, Kathleen, but I've got on the texting bandwagon.
Oh,
yeah, with clients,
good.
I'm like, oh, I don't want to interrupt them. I won't do that. And I'm like, oh, I do it all the time now. So feel free, people.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for tuning in to our live stream webinar on the Nevada Women's Business Center YouTube channel with our fantastic community partner, Sarah Brown of FranNet. And if you have any questions, please give us a call at the Nevada Women's Business Center at area code 702-734-3555 or online. Our website is www.nevadawbc.com. I'm Kathleen Taylor, and thanks again for tuning in. And thank you
you,
so
Kathleen.
much.
Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.